Welcome to our podcast, Firewalls, Flashpoints, the podcast that dives into global fault lines and trenches. History rarely announces itself when it is about to repeat. In the late 19th century, Europe walked confidently into what it believed was an age of progress and stability. Yet beneath the surface, tensions were building. Alliances tightening, rivals hardening, and nationalism spreading across the continent after the reshaped balance of power. Then came the Sarajevo assassination. The assassination of the Archduke lit the fuse that ignited the catastrophic we now know as the World War. What followed was not a simple accident of history. It was a chain of reaction of alliances, fears, and political miscalculations. 2 decades later, the world watched another warning unfold as European leaders hesitated to confront the ambitions of the Nazis, a hesitation that ultimately gave way to the devastation of the Second World War. For decades after that war, the United States emerged not as a superpower, but a self declared guardian of global stability, rebuilding Europe through the Marshall Aid and presenting itself as the architect of the new international order. But history is complicated. Power shifts, narratives change, and in today's structured world, the same nation once seen as a peacemaker is now, in the eyes of many critics, viewed as one of the most aggressive military actors on the global stage. So, the question we explore on this episode of Firewalls and Flashpoints is simply but deeply unsettling. Are we witnessing the early echoes of the same geopolitical patterns that once led the world into catastrophe? Or are we merely interpreting modern tensions through lens of history's darkest chapters? But in the past teaches us anything is this: the road to global conflict rarely begins with a declaration of war. It begins with decisions, with assumptions, with leaders who believe escalation can still be controlled until suddenly it can't. For most of my life, I studied the origins of the great conflicts of the 20th century. Like many students of history, I traced the road to the World War back through the tensions that followed, the tightening systems of European alliances, and finally, the assassination in Sarajevo, the moment historians still refer to as the spark of the war. When I studied the lead up to the war, I often thought the catastrophe was driven largely by failures of leadership and misguided decisions. One example frequently discussed is how European governments struggled to confront the growing aggression of the Germans early enough. For a long time, I assumed those tensions or those lessons the modern world had already absorbed, mistakenly from another era that we would never repeat. Yet today, watching global tensions escalate, it feels as though history's warnings are echoing again. The United States, a country that emerged from the devastation of the Second World War, positioning itself as a stabilizing force, championing reconstructions through programs like the Marshall Plan, is now increasingly viewed by critics as one of the most assertive military actors on the global stage. Whether that perception is fair or not is part of the debate, but the shift is how American power is interpreted around the world and is undeniable. It raises an uncomfortable question. We are witnessing the same patterns. Are we witnessing the same patterns of escalations that once pulled nations into global war? Or are we simply seeing the unavoidable tensions of changing the world order? History rarely repeats itself, but it often rhymes. Though, on the UK government and Iran question regarding the United Kingdom's stance on potential military action involving Iran, several realities shape British decisions. The UK rarely joins military action without legal and parliamentary backing. After the political fallout from the Iraq War, British governments became far more cautious about joining US-led military operations. Parliament, public opinion, and legal justification now matter much more. So the strategic caution, successive UK governments, including those present and past administrations, have preferred deterrence, sanctions, naval protection of shipping, diplomacy through allies, rather than launching direct attacks. Britain's role is often that of balancing ally loyalty and regional stability. The UK is closely aligned with the United States through NATO and intelligence sharing or cooperation, but it also tries to avoid wider Middle East escalations that could threaten energy routes, global trade, and European security. So it is responsibility versus restraints. Some critics argue Britain should stand firmly with allies militarily, while others believe refusing to escalate conflict is responsible leadership. Both arguments exist within British politics. In reality, British governments often try to walk a tightrope, support allies, avoid another long Middle Eastern war, maintain international law credibility. My honest analytical take: Britain's reluctance to jump into another major Middle Eastern conflict is largely shaped by the political scars of Iraq and Afghanistan, not weaknesses. Many policymakers now believe preventing escalation can be a form of strength, even if it frustrates allies. Now, let's take a look at what is called warmongers. The term warmonger isn't an official title, it is a political label people use to describe individuals or groups that are seen as encouraging or pushing for war rather than diplomacy. Different people apply the label to different actors depending on their political views. Who people